Wait for it. Wait for it. And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. David Weber, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, I'm David Weber. There you go. I'm introduced.
Yeah, that's you've been around a little bit, so people kind of already know who you were.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
kind of scary when I think that I sold the first one in 1989, um, which is before an awful lot of your viewers were born, probably.
I honestly don't know the average age of our viewer. I don't think we
Yeah,
get those metrics, and I haven't
yeah.
dove into
Well,
it.
I found that it seems to be before the birth of most of the people I run into these days.
Yeah,
It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they say month and year, and you say October the 24th, 1952.
my favorite is one of my buddies, his wife is a teacher, and she's teaching these kids how to do research papers. And so, if you find two articles, one says your point, the other says the opposite, and the one that disagrees with you is newer, that's the most relevant research, and they're going to teach them that. So this kid came into her class and was like, I found this article, but I don't know if it's too old. It's from the late 1900s. It was from a 1999 article. I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
check me
yeah,
out.
yeah. Yeah, the number of people who don't understand that 1900 means like 1900 to 1915 or so, it's
Right.
kind of appalling, But we don't teach them that.
Sadly, no.
Okay,
So
we ought to. It's one of the many things we ought to teach them.
So the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we found them, and all I can say is I have a library card. I mean, that's kind of the way most people find. I'm old enough. I remember the Dewey Decimal System.
Oh, me too. Well, okay, I'm guessing I'm older than you are. And
Yes, I
yes,
was in '81, so I was
okay,
alive before your first book was published.
but
I was
not by
7.
much. Okay. Well,
I
it's
was
like
7.
I remember card catalogs,
Yep.
and that kind of thing. I kind of miss them, but I'm sure librarians don't. Um, the what was I going to say? There was something I was going to say
The
there.
card catalog, if you knew what you were looking for, was super efficient. I
Yeah,
will say some of the AI built into the Google search, like I was able to describe the book I was looking for because I couldn't remember it, and I
yeah,
wanted to get a new copy that was like the book's from the '70s, but I
yeah,
wanted to reintroduce my kids to some of the stuff I read, and just the description, I was able to find the book. I
yeah,
tried at the library first, and the librarians were like, "Oh, JR, we got nothing." So
yeah.
I do like some of the searchability the internet gives, but I'm also like you, a troglodyte, so
Yeah. Oh,
give me a little bit.
I remember what I was going to say. If you want to get an introduction to my stuff or several other authors' stuff, if you go to the Baen Free Library at Baen.com, the Baen Free Library has, I think it's about 50, 60 titles in it that are totally free electronic downloadables.
And it's part of our partnership working with Bain as far as getting some of these interviews set up. We actually, when we interview their authors, we link to all of the Bain social media as well.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so part of that does link to the Bain Free Library.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that is absolutely the best place to see whether or not you're going to like my stuff. I've got about 5, 6 titles in there, I think.
and
Um,
if the books are produced by Bain, generally speaking, you can buy the ebook from them a little
Directly
bit
from them,
cheaper
yes.
than if you went to like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, whatever.
Yeah.
And the author tends to get a little bit more of the cut, is my understanding when I talk to Tony.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the cut is, but I think you're probably correct. I haven't really looked
Now,
at
I
it
don't know if
that
it's
closely.
more of a percentage or just the percentage of it's higher because they're keeping more of it, because
Yeah.
obviously that makes a difference in the math. And there's a reason I study history. I don't like math.
Well, if Bain is selling it to you directly, then Amazon's not taking a cut out of it. So that would logically mean that there would be more for the author, at least available. Back in the olden days, before Bain was on Amazon, they bound CDs into the backs of series novels that had all of the earlier books in the series,
Oh, nice.
plus other novels out there. But Amazon made them stop. So we're continuing to sell directly to the reader, but we're no longer able to provide the free CDs, and we can't provide them online somewhere for you to go look for them either. And I rather regret that. That was one of Jim Bain's notions. Spider Robinson said, speaking of Jim in an essay of a review while Jim was still alive, he said Jim Bain seems to be the only science fiction publisher who actually wants to live in the 21st century. And then Jim didn't make it. We lost him to a stroke in his 50s. So, and I don't think the field as a whole really grasps everything that we lost when we lost him that early.
I will say, as far as traditional publishing goes, Bain seems to be the only one that's actually seems to like their readers, mostly because you're not owned by a larger company that
Yep.
could potentially use your publishing house as a write-off for other things, or balance tax ledgers.
Well, that's part of it. Another part is that Bain has this reputation in some circles as being a home for right wing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bain doesn't really care what your
Wasn't Eric
political
Flint
affiliation
a
is.
communist?
Well, he was definitely a socialist. He was a
Okay,
union organizer for the socialists. He and I collaborated on a lot of books.
nice guy.
Uh, he was a wonderful guy. And he's not the only person that they published who is what you might call left of center. Um, and and Bain doesn't care. What Bain cares about is whether or not it's a good story. Okay, I mean that's the bottom line. Well, they care whether or not people realize it's a good story and they'll buy it. I mean,
Right.
obviously, but by and large, Bain doesn't have any political filtration system. And one of the problems you have with larger publishers is you have a larger editorial staff, and there is a tendency for it to skew in one direction or another, if you follow what I'm saying. And that doesn't mean that the editors working for that publisher can't be professional and step past whatever their views are, whatever, if they're not the same as the author. But it does mean that it affects the types of stories that are offered to them, and the ones that they buy. And it's an unfortunate, well, it's not necessarily unfortunate, but it's an artifact of human nature that it's going to work that way. And the bigger the institutional body of people involved, actually, the more likely that that's going to become sort of a communal mindset, if you
Yeah.
follow me.
So before we get too deeply into this interview, we do have to
Yes,
ask you the religion question. So are you ready for this, David?
yes, go ahead.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I never really watched Firefly. I was too busy writing when it was out. And my problem with Star Trek is that I don't think they had anybody with military experience in their stable when they were writing it. I mean, all you have to do is look at, uh, for example, the situation in which you have Picard and Riker both giving orders on the bridge in a tactical situation. The episode, the series-ending episode with the Borg cube, where they're trying desperately to get Picard back when what they should be thinking about is how do we destroy the cube. And see, there was a little teeny tiny plot hole in that episode that bugged the hell out of me, which was that they could beam boarding parties onto the Borg cube and then their individual shields would reset. I would have loved to have seen the Borg's individual shields reset against 5 pounds of antimatter, and that would have been the end of the Borg cube right there. They would have had to write off Picard, which they weren't going to do for plot reasons, but that's exactly what Riker should have been doing in the Earth is at peril, etc. And finally, they promoted him to captain, and he said, "No, I'm not ready for that yet. I need to go back and study at the master's feet." And the real military would have said, if you don't think you're ready to be a captain, you're probably right. There's a refuse station in Ganymede orbit that's a commander's build, and it's yours till you retire. I mean, you pull the chair out, especially after Starfleet got decimated that way. And the guy doesn't sit down. You're kind of like, so long. So kind of by default, okay, Star Wars, especially the first three, um, uh, work for me better than the other two. Um, I do have to say that I was very disappointed in the final trilogy, the last trilogy, at any rate, for a lot of reasons. But I thought that the the solo they did, uh, uh, Rogue One, I thought that was stupendous.
I love that one.
I thought that. Hmm?
I said I love
I'm
that one
sorry.
too.
Yes, I'm sorry. I got some kind of an electronic twang when you said that, and I
Oh,
lost what you're saying. They took chances with that one. They set up how it tied into the first trilogy. They weren't afraid to actually kill the leads, and that happens in military operations. Not quite on that scale usually, but that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about in writing military science fiction is that you can't sanitize it. You can't. All the stormtroopers can't always miss all the good guys. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. I was really impressed with that, and I think that's one reason I liked the third trilogy as little as I did because I'd had my hopes raised by Rogue One. You see what I'm saying?
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I'm told that I've had some of the same complaints about Star Trek, and I also thought it was a little too utopian. It didn't seem to have an understanding of humans' base nature. Um, but I'm
Well,
told some of that was fixed in the books. Um, we interviewed one of the authors that has written, Kristen Catherine Rush. She's written some of the Star Trek books, and she said the books
mhm,
are open up a whole new world to that universe. But that's not obviously what made
yeah.
the screen. That's how most people know it.
Yeah, well, and the other problem, at least in the earlier Star Trek novels, was that you couldn't change any of the main characters. If you had
Yeah,
the original main characters, they had to be at the end of the book. They had to have exactly the same historical and emotional baggage that they'd had at the beginning, which is why in the earlier books, the ones that were written about minor characters in terms of TV and screen, um, they tended to be better books because the author had more freedom. I was offered Star Wars novel at one
okay.
point, and I told them I was too busy with Honor Harrington, and they said, "Well, we'll give you two." And I said, "Not too busy with Honor Harrington." They said, "We'll make it three." And they wanted a series. They said that the reason they wanted me was that the series was Princess Leia as a relatively young woman in command positions and so forth and so forth, and because of Honor Harrington. And I just finally had time. So, look, I'm really, really flattered, but I really, really, I can't do that. I've got too many commitments to Bain right now. And I'd sent Tim Zahn an email when they sent me the offer because of his history with the Star Wars books. And he was, I'm sorry, I'd called him. I didn't have his email at that point. We were friends, and I had him in my contact list. But anyway, I he got home from overseas, which is where he was when I asked him to call, and he said, "You didn't take it, did you?" And I said, "No," and he said, "Oh, good." And I said, "I dodged a bullet." He said, "No, you dodged a howitzer shell." He said that they were looking for I think they were looking for like a 10 novel arc, and they wanted all the characterization for all the main characters set in the first book. And he said they would have been over your shoulder the entire time that you were writing, and you would have been really restricted by canon on what you could do with Leia and some of the other characters. He said you really wouldn't have enjoyed the experience. So I was like, okay. Now my wife's nephew has never quite forgiven me because he wanted to go to Skywalker Ranch, but aside from that, it worked worked fairly well. Yeah. But yeah, that's so out of the choices, Star Wars. Although actually, my favorite TV slash movie would have to be Babylon 5. I know they've been talking about a remake of it. What I'd love to see them do is remake the original series exactly, but with modern CGI.
Yeah.
I think that would be awesome. Um, although where they would find somebody to recreate Delin, for example. I mean, My God. But yeah, Babylon 5 would be my favorite TV science fiction of the ones that I've actually watched. I don't watch a lot of TV, and when I do, I tend to get hooked on series and binge watch them after the fact. Like one of my favorite series is Person of Interest.
Okay.
Uh, and I mean, there are some problems with it, but by and large, they treated the questions seriously. Um, and they were neither utopian nor Luddite where tech was concerned. Okay. Um, so it's um, kind of, I was talking to my wife about it over lunch. And if you've seen Person of Interest, the kind of thing that makes a story work and that made that series work in a lot of ways is the progression of the character of Root from the moment that she's introduced. From the amoral, uncaring, criminal, brilliant mastermind that she is to the person who dies for her friends in the final season. That's storytelling, my friend.
I've watched some of those too, although I haven't watched it in totality. I might have to
Yeah.
give it another look.
Though they kind of lose their touch a little bit during the fourth season. If you actually binge watch it with the episodes back to back, the threads carry through better than they did if you were watching it and weekly episodes when it first came out. But the final season, which is a shortened season, they knew it was going to be the last. It's killer. It's really really well done.
Okay, that's high praise. All right, and because we are polytheistic here at the
Yeah.
Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia.
It would have to be Chronicles of Narnia, just because that's the one that I am the most familiar with, that I've loved ever since I got The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for my 5th birthday. I mean, it's just, and I have to say that the cinematic, the most recent or more recent cinematic treatment of it, they did really well. There were some things I wish they had done different. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings. Okay, it's not as bad as Lord of the Rings in the sense that in the Lord of the Rings you had to leave something out to get it onto the screen, no matter how long you made the movies.
Right.
And I've had people talking about Lord of the Rings, and I'm one of them. Say, well, okay. Very few people complain about Tom Bombadil not being in the Lord of the Rings, but it's like when the hobbits trick the Ents into trick Treebeard into going and realizing what's going on, or where they kill Saruman off at the end of the Two Towers, all of that, and you say, God, they should have done more with this, they should have done more with that, and you get, yeah, but overall, damn, they did a good job, and
And
it simply speaks to the scope of the original work that you left this stuff out, and everybody who loved the books loved this part that you left out, loved that part that you left out, but you still did such a good job that even the people who are upset with the things you left out are delighted with the final product.
yeah, and I think in addition to that, one of the things is Peter Jackson, that was the director of those, set the bar on what fantasy filmmaking could be. In the past, some of the fantasy movies kind of look like a high school production of something instead of like legitimate,
Yeah,
proper movies.
yeah,
I mean, his
yeah.
costuming, his set, like all of it was so on par that now, like I watched The Rings of Power and I went into it with no preconception one way or another. But when you compare it to what Peter Jackson did, it just doesn't hold a candle.
No,
Just
well,
with the movie part of it.
yeah, but Jackson, and he was like, okay, let's make all of them at once. Okay, I mean, there's no question that he changed how we're going to do fantasy movies, especially. But he also has going for him the amount. Okay, Peter Mayhew, um, um, Chewbacca from the Star Wars movies. Sharon and I met him and his wife at 2 or 3 cons, and we talked. And he was talking about when they started to make the second trilogy, that he visited the set. I think he was already pretty much wheelchair bound by then because he had uh, mobility issues. But anyway, he was talking about how in the first one, the first three trilogy, they'd done this, they'd done that, they'd done the other to create the backdrops and the sets. And he said, so there I was sitting in my chair, and they're just doing all this in front of a green screen, and they've got stacks of CDs that have the background and everything else on that they're loading in. It You've almost gotten to the point where somebody making movies or television has as much freedom in terms of special effects and so forth as the author who wrote the original work. That's always been a huge problem if you're going to convert a written story into a live action in front of you story. Because I can describe anything I want to describe. I may describe it better. I may describe it worse. But I can put you out there with that fleet with 300 ships of the wall in it, or whatever. Um, and prior to the advent of CGI, directors couldn't do that. As recently as Babylon 5, which is recent to me, it's ancient history to you. But when Babylon 5 came out, the CGI was revolutionary for especially for a TV production. And now you look at it and you go, "Oh boy, they could do better than that." Well, yeah, they could. But the freedom that's given to directors and writers to think big in terms of the visual impact and the imagery that they can share with the viewer is just absolutely phenomenal. Um, and the I think we're a little spoiled by it. It means that when we go back and look at some of the classics of cinema, like Casablanca or some of the other movies, it actually helps if they're in black and white, because if they're in black and white, you're like, oh, okay, this is pre, so they're not going to have all of the special effects and so forth that we expect now. But you almost wind up shortchanging the production as a whole simply because they didn't have the tech that you're used to now. See
I
what I'm
will
saying?
absolutely, and I agree with that. But the trade-off is in some cases, I would argue that some of the acting ability has gone down because they rely so much on the green screen behind them that you don't get the wide depth of emotion that you get from example like a Casablanca or some of the older classic movies where their acting was all you had to sell it.
I think that what happens sometimes, okay, that does happen sometimes. But I think another thing that happens is because they can be so extravagant with the backgrounds and everything else, the viewer doesn't pay as much attention and misses stuff that in a black
Possible.
and white movie they would see. Okay, Christopher Reeves in Superman. Okay, do you remember the sequence where he's just been Superman? He's left Lois Lane on her balcony. Now he's coming in as Clark Kent, and he's going to take he's decided he's going to tell her, and then he changes his mind. But he comes
Right.
in and he takes off his glasses, and he's recognizably Superman. Okay, changes his mind, doesn't do anything but put the glasses back on, but his body language changes, his expression changes, his shoulders are suddenly not quite as square, et cetera, et cetera. And you understand in that moment how somebody could know Clark Kent and Superman and not realize they were the same guy.
There was a female actor who was in one of the modern shows. I didn't watch it. I think it was called For the Boys, and they had
Mm-hmm.
one where she did the same thing. She put her hair up and put her hair down, and you could almost not realize it's the same actress. And
Yeah.
then I don't go to a lot of cons. I don't do crowds very well, but I've been to one with Declan Finn, and I've watched people who knew him personally for years. And the minute he takes that outrageous orangish, I'm colorblind, I think it's orange, whatever that neon colored coat he normally wears off, and he's just wearing a regular shirt, suddenly they don't recognize him anymore.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
do think we look for visual cues and kind of sometimes see what we
Yeah.
want to see.
Well, it's not just the visual cues. That's definitely part of it, a big part of it, what Reeve was doing there in terms of giving the actor credit for the emotions that he or she is portraying. I think we get some of sort of a sensory overload from the background and the explosions and the
I
car
could see that.
chases or the blizzard or whatever that takes us away from the central focus on the characters. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. I'm saying it's a different thing.
I don't
Okay.
think I've ever considered that, but I think there's something to that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Sharon and I don't see as many movies as a lot of people do, or as we used to see. We just, especially since the kids are, all out of the household now and whatnot, it's just us. We tend to, let's watch it on the computer or, whatever instead. Um, but yeah, it's movies are, movies and TV are a very different medium from what I do, and the constraints are very different. But it's been kind of fun to sit down on occasion and analyze why the constraints are different and exactly which constraints are different. Because the art of storytelling is pretty much universal, no matter the genre or the story type or the medium. But there are some things that are medium specific that you can and can't do given the medium in which you're working. And in that respect, the written is probably the most flexible of all, but it's also the one that is sometimes hardest for the consumer to follow,
Yeah.
to invest in. Okay. It's when I was a kid, you did not have you didn't have computers at all. You certainly didn't have the internet. You didn't have, so if you weren't going to be watching TV or in the movies and you wanted a story, you were reading. Okay, and in a sense, there are now enough options available uh, that a lot of people don't realize just how much pleasure you can get out of reading, investing yourself in the book. Um, I'm probably prejudiced because of what my medium is, but I think that's true. It's kind of like radio in some ways, and plunged you more deeply into the story than television,
Yeah.
because television supplied the backdrop, the background. All you got with radio was the sound effect and the characters' voices. Um, and so that made it a very okay. Okay. I may be showing my age here. Are you familiar with the series Gunsmoke?
I am.
Okay. Do you know who was originally offered the role of the sheriff?
No, I don't.
Uh, crap. The same guy who did Cannon in the TV series. He was short. He was round. Uh, he had a magnificent voice. But the thing was, he was Dylan's voice on the radio series that preceded TV. So they offered him the role, and he turned it down because he didn't think TV was going to be a thing. so so um, and who knows how it would have worked if he'd taken the offer. But that's one of those might have beens that are kind of fascinating. I find now that I'll be 73 in October, I have more trouble summoning up specific names when I'm looking for them, which is why I can't give you his name will probably come to me,
So I
like,
know the sheriff is Matt Dillon. I'm doing a quick Google search as we're
yeah,
talking.
yeah,
They originally offered it to John Wayne. He recommended, after declining, James Arness, the actor.
yeah,
I don't think he actually was formally offered. They're saying, according to that, the Wikipedia for it. Obviously, Wikipedia is not the
yeah,
most reliable source, but it's all I could quickly find.
yeah. Okay,
Um,
William Conrad, that's the name of the guy I was trying to come up with.
okay, he's listed as one of the ones who was recommended in the initial draft.
Yes. He was the original recommendation, and he said, "No, no, I'm too busy. I'm doing other stuff." And I think he would have handled the role well, but it would have been very different, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely,
Um,
that what the actor
yeah.
brings to it makes a big difference to
Well, it's
to how.
kind of like it's kind of like one of the people who was considered for the role of Harry Callahan in the Dirty Harry movies was Frank Sinatra.
Oh,
Okay, can
Yeah, that'd
you
have been a lot
imagine how that
different.
would have differed?
Oh yeah.
You know, or some of the people who were originally considered for the role of see, I'm having one of those 73 moments. Crap. Our starship captain from Star Wars,
Han Solo.
Han Solo. Some of the people who were originally considered for that role are interesting contrasts as well. And it's hard now to consider anybody but Harrison Ford as Han Solo, or anybody else for Harry Callahan, or some of those other roles that they just the actors owned when they got in there. But they could have been very different with somebody else cast in the role. And that's not a problem you have when you're writing a book. You cast
No.
whoever you want. Yeah. I don't like that guy. Let's see. Let's change. Yes, we'll change his emotions. Yeah. Okay. Well, he really pissed me off. I'm going to take his right arm away. That'll fix him. I mean, if they get to, hey, don't forget, I can always bring up a secondary character to replace your sorry butt if you don't do what I want you to do.
All right. So as we wrap these religion questions up and dive into the series that brought us here,
Yes.
we're going to ask you, one of the crying shames of adulthood is we don't ask each other the important questions anymore. So we're bringing them back thanks to our sponsors. But what is your favorite dinosaur?
I am almost equally addicted to coffee and tea. Anybody who reads Honor Harrington and sees how she doesn't like coffee should recognize the work of a recovering addict. Uh, I fell off the truck again about 6, 7 books in. So I'm afraid I'm not monogamous in that respect. If I could only have one of them, if they told me I had to pick one and I could never have the other one again, I would probably pick coffee.
Okay. I don't know why I pegged you as a hot chocolate kind of guy.
Well, because of Honor Harrington, a lot of people assume that I love I do like hot chocolate, but not as much as I like. Now, I will confess, I am totally willing to commit adultery with my coffee and add caramel to it or whatever. It's not just a little bigamous trigamous there, but I prefer. Let's put it this way: I prefer my coffee with cream and a little sugar, and I prefer my tea unsweetened, whatever that says about me.
So I'm from the South, so my tea needs to be iced and sweet enough that Wilford Brimley comes out of the grave to slap me on the face and tell me diabetes.
Oh,
Uh,
that would be my wife, Sharon. Sharon loves Chick-fil-A tea because she can stand her straw upright in it and it won't fall over.
in South Carolina and North Carolina, when I've lived in both those states, they call it table wine.
Yes, that's true. It's just and I like sweet tea, but I can't drink sweet tea with my meal. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was in grad school at Villanova in Pennsylvania, we actually used to go to the Hooters a lot, not because I think their wings are especially good. It's the only place in the region that had sweet iced tea, because the company was open in Atlanta, Georgia, and everywhere you go, they have to have the same menu. Now, they might not sell any sweet tea. They might keep one cup, literally, that's it, but they have to say they have it. And so we would go there because that was the only place I could get sweet iced tea.
Oh yeah. Well, it's always. I always realize that I am in foreign territory when they ask me what I drink, and I say unsweetened iced tea, and they look at me like there's another kind. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I am now in a foreign land. I was surprised how hard sweet tea was defined as the default in New Orleans many
Really?
years
I
ago.
would figure that it would be because it's the South.
I think it's the French culture, and it may have just been my particular experience. And also, I was there for the first national convention, I think, after Katrina.
Okay.
So they were still selling a lot of beverages and restaurants out of cans because water was still,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
I went there for the Mardi Gras before Hurricane Katrina, so it was at its height. But tea was not what I was consuming back then when I was a younger man. So I couldn't really tell you.
Yeah. Yes.
it was between
Then
my
it,
two deployments. So
yeah, then it was more like whether there was an E in whiskey or not. I understand
yes,
what you're talking about. Yes, yes, yes.
and
I
it
mean,
was one of those. So it was.
everyone should have their favorite beverage to hand, when they're writing. I'm just saying.
It was when I was on limbo between deployments, and so it was like we could go anytime. And when you're that age and you're going to war again, it's that live for today, for tomorrow we shall die
Yep,
mentality, which is not
yep,
conducive
yep,
to
yep,
overall
yep.
long term health because you're eating crap, you're drinking crap, but you just didn't care.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So
okay. My son is a Marine. He's a Pendleton Marine right now.
okay.
And he came home from, he was on embassy duty. He came home from the embassy in Jerusalem on September 30th, 7 days before the October 7th attack.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, I got to go back. I got to go back. My guys are still there. And we're telling him, Michael, it doesn't work that way. You can't. But he says, I got to go back. I got to go back. My guys are there. Um, and so from there, they sent him to Ankara, Turkey, for his second hitch of embassy duty. And they actually had more. I understand that they actually had more unrest and whatnot in Turkey than they did in Israel, in terms of stuff going on, not actually on the firing line, if you follow me.
Absolutely. I don't know. That was the hardest part of getting the medical retirement is you feel guilty because they're still going, but at a certain
Yeah,
time, life has other plans. Your body says no, but I
yeah,
definitely understand the sentiment.
yeah.
Uh,
My brother-in-law was a Marine for 22 years,
okay.
uh, and so and my daughter, Megan, one of my twin girls, is currently a corporal in the National Guard. So we're a military family. And I think that has something to do with how I write the books. I mean, I was writing them before we knew that Michael was going to decide to go into the Marines, instead of going straight off to college, or before Megan decided to join the Guard. I don't know how their decisions might have been shaped by their uncle and by me, but it's a small percentage of American families who actually provide the manpower and the woman power that we see in uniform now.
And
And you can't, there's gulfs there that just can't be bridged, in terms of really having a visceral understanding, a firsthand understanding of what it's like. And that's one reason why I write the kinds of stories that I write.
when they
Um,
when we go through the PTSD clinic, because I did mine initially at Walter Reed when I was recovering from the brain injury, and that was one of the things they told us. It's like something like five, and I'm pulling it from way back, but they said it was something like 5% of the American population, and this is largely because the Vietnam and World War II guys were still alive, but only
yeah,
5% of the nation served in the military. Of that 5%, only about 5% deployed to a combat zone. And of that 5% that deployed to a combat zone, only about 1% actually engaged the enemy, because the tooth to tail
yes,
ratio is been about 1 to 10 since World War II.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, the more mechanized we get, the more the truer that is. It's kind of funny in civilian economy, mechanization and industrialization reduces manpower requirements. But trying to keep a bunch of guys wandering around out in the middle of Central Europe, or a rice paddy, or Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, to project that kind of material support forward. My God, the quartermaster always has the last word. Okay. And that's even truer now than it used to be. And in some ways, that's a good thing, because it means that we actually see the casualty totals of World War II are vastly lower than the casualty totals of World War One. Okay. And that's because we have more of machines killing machines now. But you still got to have that guy, that gal who's out there actually personally getting shot at, or
so it's also the medicine improvements. And every time we've been in a war, our medicine abilities get better. The injuries that I took in Iraq, the 2 times I got shot, would have killed
Yeah.
me even in the first Gulf War because my
Yeah.
bulletproof vest did its job. And the technology we used for that wasn't available in the first Gulf War.
Yes.
As far as the flak jackets, we
Yes.
changed them, and I imagine that's true every time you look backwards. Just the
Well,
technology.
very few people realize that the First World War was the first major war America engaged in where battlefield deaths outnumbered deaths by disease
Yeah.
in our armed forces. And that was because of where medicine was going and the commitment that was made to get them forward. But the casualty rate is lower, not just the fatality rate these days.
Well, the other part of that is Korea is the first time, which is what also makes it different, where the average soldier's rifle that they were issued at basic and that they took to war was not essentially a militarized version of what they hunted with at home.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there's also there's a book. I cannot remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it's called On Killing.
Yeah, I know
You
who you're
read
talking
it?
about. I've read it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that he gets at is the fact that historically only about 10% of troops actually engaged in combat fired at the enemy. One of the reasons for the mass shoulder-to-shoulder formations was not simply to mass firepower, but so that the non-coms could make sure you were actually aiming at the enemy or in his general direction. And the same ratio held true for fighter pilots. Like 10% of all fighter pilots got like 90% of all air-to-air victories. And the U.S. military after World War II started looking at how they could increase the percentage of troops who actually fired at the enemy. By Vietnam, they had it up to like 80-90%, which is a phenomenal rate. But it's also one of the reasons why why veterans of Vietnam had as much trouble reverting to civilian life. The other one was that you got on an airplane in Da Nang, and 8 hours later you were home in the U.S. and out in the streets. You didn't have the decompression time coming back from the front that
the other part of that was you also, like with World War II, you couldn't throw a rock and not hit one of your neighbors who's a veteran too. So you had that community.
Yes.
They didn't have that because they were so disparate when it comes back from.
Yes.
The book On Killing was written by Dave Grossman. It just came to me.
Yeah.
There have been, I know my grandfather, when he was alive, he fought in World War II. He did not like some of his stats about, we didn't shoot the enemy, because he was an infantryman who landed on Omaha. And he's like hell, we didn't shoot to kill him.
Yeah.
And so there have been some critiques of his methodology. I think the psychology he hits at, when you look at the way we do training, I do think he's spot on there, because he talks about like the cadences we run to, the training we do. We're not shooting at bullseyes anymore. We're shooting at silhouettes.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I thought the chapter where he was talking about first-person shooter games and adolescent males was interesting too, because he pointed out that you're basically doing the same sort of desensitization that the military does on the age and gender group that is most likely to be involved in acts of violence anyway. And I think he has a point there too.
Yeah. I do think, like I said, I like a lot of what he had to say. He's written other books that were worth reading as well. Mm-hmm. But I can forgive the methodology because I think the message was still good.
Yeah.
And I just from my own experience, like watching what I went through at boot camp with the shark attack, which is where they come all run out screaming at you and they're in your face, and you could smell the onions and the coffee and the cigarettes that they consumed. And when they got rid of it, like for when my nephew went through, it builds a different mindset. I mean,
I think definitely it's have you seen the movie oh crap, I'm having another lost name. Guy, the actor who played Joe Friday. Oh crap, the movie is The DI. And it's a bunch of guys who have this DI that they absolutely hate because of how brutal he is with them and everything else. And then they find themselves in combat and they realize, thank God we had him.
That was my experience with my own DI. Like I remember they'd get on us if we didn't close the dust cover on our M16. And sometimes it was hands-on training that would not pass muster in modern Army, and modern being relative.
Yeah.
But then you get in Iraq and the sandstorms are everywhere, and you hear about like the Jessica Lynch convoy, that part of the problem is most of their rifles weren't functional because the sand and the grit. And if they had closed the dust cover, if they'd maintained their rifles properly, maybe some of that could have been avoided.
Yeah.
And I'm like, thank God they beat the crap out of us, because I still remember that a decade later.
Yeah. Well, it's like Michael went Paris Island, okay? And Paris, the Marines are probably still the least kindest, gentlest of the lot, and they've still got the Crucible, which the military's version, the Army's version, what they call it, the Forge, I think, is sort of a watered down version of the Crucible. But I remember right after he graduated from Paris Island, he said to me, the worst moment and the best moment in my life came 60 seconds apart. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, we were doing the Crusher, and they were on the last day of the Crusher. He was a squad leader. We're doing the Crusher. We're on the last day of the Crusher. They're standing knee deep or a little more in ice cold water in a ditch. And they have to climb out of the ditch. They have to low crawl for like 150 meters with their sand filled ammunition cans. Then they have to everybody has to carry somebody else to evacuate the wounded. Then they had like a wall climb. They had like 4 more things to do. And then they had to do the march back to bivouac. And he said, I'm standing there in the ditch. He said, and I was done, Dad. I was done. I could not climb out of that ditch. I couldn't do it. And I looked around, and the other guys, they're just as dead as I am, and they can't do it either. And he said, and I realized I had come that far, and I was going to fail right now at the last moment. He said, absolutely the worst moment of my life. He said, the best moment of my life came when I got out of that ditch somehow anyway, and I started crawling, and I looked back, and every one of the guys was behind me. Okay? And that's something that I think even civilian sports don't teach you, is that kind of moment. And even that's not going to prepare you for the reality of combat, but it's going to make a difference.
I had to look because I don't remember the Forge, and I looked it up. So the Forge actually didn't start doing that till 2016. Before that, it was just your FTX, where it was like, I don't know what normal boot camp was because I did OSUT for the infantry, but I mean ours was like in the field. But it's the same principle, right? They just beat the crap out of you until. And I remember coming back from that one and having to be the road guard, which means in the Army, when you're at boot camp, if you're the road guard, you're either out front or in the rear, and you got to go ahead and stop traffic. And then when you're about halfway, you got to sprint, because I was in the back, all the way up there with all the gear they're marching with, and then stop traffic and then sprint back. But that's how I lost so much weight at boot camp. They should have never let me start. I was too fat. But the doctor at the MEP station served in World War II with my grandfather. So he's like, you'll lose it at boot camp. It's fine. And I wrestled, so I could do the PT, right? Like I could do all the physical standards. It just didn't make weight or tape. And so rather than send me home, they just made me their project. It was like, oh, we got a fat body.
And we'll fix it.
I lost so much weight. My mother didn't recognize me at graduation. She looked for white dudes with glasses in the right platoon. That's how she narrowed me down.
Michael put on weight. But it was all muscle mass.
And
he was field, he was soccer, the whole thing before he went in.
Did he grow any at boot camp? Because I know I grew 3 inches and the supply hated me.
I am not positive. I feel, I'll put it to you this way: the picture that I've got on my Facebook page now is on the parade deck at Paris Island right after graduation, and I'm hugging him. It is the very first picture that was ever taken where my head is on his shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, men,
that's why it's my picture.
Yeah, if you start the right age, it's very possible that he grew some. I know I grew 3 inches and supply hated me.
But
what are you going to do? I couldn't control that. But we've gone far in a field, and I want to talk to you about the Star Kingdom. So we're going to pause for a moment.
That's true.
Shamelessly shill for the man, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the books that Bane sent you here to talk about.
Across 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 wars, there is always a question. What do you do when all the chips are on the table? Do you run? Try to find salvation in the arms of an easy peace? Or do you stand and fight and send your enemies into whatever hole they crawled out of? On deadly ground, A heroic Last Stand anthology has 10 stories addressing that question. Each character faces the impossible in different ways, but all will be tested before the day is done. Can they earn a heroic victory amongst the endless eternity of space, or are they doomed to fall into obscurity?
All right. Thank you for sticking with that commercial interlude. And now we're here to talk to David about the Star Kingdom. So, first off, obviously, the Star Kingdom is set in your Honor Harrington universe, correct?
Yes, it is. Yes.
All right. I know the main character's name is Stephanie Harrington. I'm assuming, based on the fact that the description has them just discovering the tree cats, that this is in the. I haven't read this one yet. I've read a lot of the other stuff.
Yep.
It's pre-Honor. It's one of her
Oh,
ancestors.
yes. Okay, let's put it this way. Honor's full name, well, before she married Hamish and it got even longer, is Honor Stephanie Harrington.
Okay.
And this is the Stephanie for whom she is named. Stephanie is about 11 years old when she arrives in the Star Kingdom with her parents. She's from the planet of Myrdal. And she's been genetically engineered for heavy grav environments. And Sphinx's gravity is 1.35 standard gravities. One of the huge differences between Honor and her great grandmother, because these books are like 400 plus years before Honor Harrington's time. Honor always wanted stars. Stephanie wants green. She wants trees. She's got an entire wilderness planet here. And in one respect, she hates it here because back home she was going to get to be a junior ranger. They don't have that program here. Back home she had her friends, and she's moved from this huge planet with the great big towers and everything else. She's now moved to this frontier world where she's out in the middle of nowhere, but her parents won't let her wander around by herself because the local fauna are really dangerous. Like, I don't know, 5-meter long dire cats, just for starters. So she's really in a rebellious mood, and a rebellious Harrington is a dangerous creature. And then she she discovers that there is a second sentient species on Sphinx, and that they're the original owners, and those are the tree cats. And the Star Kingdom novels, are set 40-50 years earlier than the books that I'm doing with Tim Zahn and Tom Pope, the Travis Long books, which is Manticoran Ascendant. So there's that kind of a gap in there. But Stephanie's arriving right on the heels or in the final stages of the plague years on Manticore. So one of the things that she discovers in the book, I think before this one, is that there's a gap in her understanding of mortality, if you will, and the people that she's meeting on this planet who lived through the plague, who saw, over half the population die. And what that does to you in terms of your attitudes and your beliefs. Stephanie is very, very smart. She's very, very determined. Her favored before her tree cat climbs quickly, who she calls Lionheart because they can't actually communicate with each other. But before her tree cat gets a hold of her default setting for dealing with irritating people is to punch them in the nose. This is not the most conducive way to build friendships. And so it's a growing up, it's a maturation, it's a young adult novel in the sense that we have young adult characters, but I have kind of strong views on what should go into young adult novels. I think Jane shares them with me. Because the first novel is a solo book by me. The others are all the follow-ons are collaborations with Jane Linskold, who I've known for 40 plus years at this point. Well, almost 40.
So you mentioned the book before this one. Now, I checked. This is the first book in the Star Kingdom series proper. Are there more books before this with Stephanie?
No. I'm sorry. I meant the books after this one. I thought that was what I said.
Okay.
The sequels to this book are collaborations with Jane.
No, no,
A
no. But
beautiful.
when you were talking about your version of the Spanish flu that was wiping out people on
Yeah.
this planet,
You
you
can,
said it happened before this book. Was there a book that covers that?
actually, there is an anthology coming out
Okay,
in November, which will have short stories that are set in this period and the earlier,
cool.
slightly earlier period. Um, the history of the Star Kingdom was pretty much established in terms of the huge events and so forth in it by the time I started writing the first book, because it
Right,
was part of the universe building that I did, and a lot of it has been alluded to in earlier novels. Earlier novels that are set much later in the Star Kingdom's history, if you follow me.
right,
So what we're doing here is, except for those major mileposts that are nailed down in the earlier books, there's not a whole lot, wasn't a whole lot of detail on what the Star Kingdom was like in those early days. That's what these books and the Manticore Ascendant novels are about. By the time you get to Honor Harrington's day, the Star Kingdom of Manticore is this sprawling interstellar commercial empire, although it's still only one system wide, deep as far as territorial control is. But it's the most affluent society in human history on a per capita basis. It's got huge cosmopolitan, got a big navy, all that stuff. Okay, in Stephanie Harrington's day, the Star Kingdom of Manticore is Denmark, or even Iceland. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody ever heard of it, kind of thing. And by the way, all the people there almost died of the plague, but fortunately, they'd left what they didn't need to send their expedition out back on Earth to be invested, and it took them 600 years to get there. So there was a lot of compound interest. So they had a lot of money back home that they could use to finance immigration to replace the deaths from the plague, etc. So this is that early period in the Star Kingdom when it's still establishing its identity and who and what it is. That's the second novel, Fire Season. Um, and that is not Stephanie on the cover. That is one of her closest friends, Jessica, who is the tree cat that she's holding there. Is her empathically bonded companion, and this is really the scene shortly after they meet, in which she saves the tree cat's life at the risk of her own. There's a lot. One of the things these books do is they look at how the bonding process works between humans and tree cats. And one of the reasons that there's as few adoptions as there have been is that usually the adoption, not always, but usually the adoption is traumatic, something huge traumatic for the human or the tree cat is happening, and they come together in the face of whatever it is, and establish the bond. Now, at the time of the Star Kingdom novels, one thing that they don't know yet is that the tree cat's average lifespan is about twice that of a human normal lifespan. The humans don't know that yet. The tree cats don't know that yet. The tree cats eventually realize that if you are a tree cat who's like 50 years old and you bond with a human, you're probably going to die 50, 60 years earlier than you would have. And they do it anyway because the mind glow, the human presence is such. I get to play with exactly how and why that works, and Jane has run some variations into it as well. I mean, we try to stay close together on what we're doing, but one of the beauties of a collaboration is there are two authors involved in the DNA of the story, and there are nuances that one author's going to see the other one probably wouldn't have seen, and then you get to explore a broader spectrum of both the background and especially the characters. That's been very true in this series. I think the next book is Tree Cat Wars, And that's the one in which you find out that just because you're an empath and a telepath and you can tell exactly what the other guy is thinking and feeling, it doesn't mean you're not going to have situations that are literally war. And the Stephanie and her friends, the Great Tree Cat Conspiracy, they call themselves, realize early on that tree cats are as intelligent as humans. And this is only, I think, the 11th sentient sapient species that humanity has encountered at this time, um, and they're afraid for the tree cats because there are interests in the colonization of Sphinx that would love to push the, there are people who have financial interests in Sphinx who don't want a native sentient species to displace their claims. Okay.
Yeah, I
And
can
so,
see that.
so the Great Tree Cat Conspiracy is built around amassing the information, the data they'll need to establish the tree cat's sapiency uh, when the day comes, and at the same time trying to keep people who might want to step on this potential threat early from figuring out just how big a threat to those interests the tree cats really are. And that's when the tree cat conspiracy finds out that tree cats actually kill each other in certain sets of circumstances. That's a serious problem for them because most humans, they see this tree cat, think a Maine Coon cat with an extra set of limbs. Okay,
Right.
about the size you're looking at. They're actually more like a combination of a bobcat and a lemur monkey in a lot of ways in terms of their body structure, but they're about the size of a good-sized Maine cat, 20%, 30% bigger, maybe, with a prehensile tail. But they're these adorable, fluffy creatures with ears and tufted ears, and they purr and they climb and they like to ride on their people's shoulders. I mean, kind of. They are also absolutely lethal if you threaten their person or them. And for tree cats, enemies come in two categories: those who have been dealt with and those who are still alive. That's kind of the way it works for them. And so our heroes and heroines here are also dealing with: do we want the rest of humanity to realize that tree cats are actually dangerous, or do we want them to still think of them as these adorable, fluffy creatures, kind of thing? And then after Tree Cat Wars, I think it's a new clan. Is that the next one? I believe.
Yep.
Okay. Um,
This is my favorite cover of all of them.
yes. Well, okay, and we're still trying to get tree cats right. Okay, we're still working on that. Um, this is I like this cover too. I think my favorite cover actually is the artist sketch for the first one, A Beautiful Friendship. I have it somewhere around here, and Stephanie looks a heck of a lot more like an 11-year-old that one than she does on the cover that we finally got. Especially since one of the banes of Stephanie's existence is that she's unlike Honor, who is like 6'2". Stephanie is petite, and she can get away with it on a heavy grav planet because her muscles have been genetically engineered to be more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. And she's late developing. And one of her bête noires, Trudy, is like blossomed at very early age, and Stephanie is both trying to not resent it and trying to pretend to herself that she doesn't resent it, all the way through, which is why I like that cover better. This is a good cover, and I like this book. Now, the this okay, A Beautiful Friendship started as a novella that I did for one of the anthologies, and that then got expanded into a novel. This started as a novella that I did for uh, an anthology that is put out by Liberty Con in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the
Is
character,
that their charity anthology they do every year?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
And the characters in this novel, um, uh, Stoneheart and Cordelia, um, are from the novella, and the novellas use they tuckerize individuals, people who go to LibertyCon for the characters. So that's where that clutch of characters came from. But this novel is more than just the novella, but that does form a portion of it. Um, and now the one that we have that just came out or is coming out. It's not out yet, I think. Um, this is I like this cover. That's not a tree cat in the foreground. That is actually a hexapuma, which is the 5 meter long version of the tree cat and is fully ground based, not an arboreal, and is not telepathic and has absolutely no desire to get to know you before he eats you. Um, but that's what Stephanie winds up fighting with basically a hunting knife and climbs quickly on the day that they meet. Um, Now it's a high tech. Think of it as a lightsaber hunting knife. So she did have some advantages there. She also had a broken arm and a bad leg at the time, though. So you don't want to mess with a Harrington no matter what. This one is there's this vast interstellar conspiracy in Honor Harrington's time that is just starting out at Stephanie's time, and there's a character in this novel who is associated with it, and who's going to have some moral decisions and choices to make in the next novel. But at the end of this novel, I will say I not going to be a huge spoiler because everybody should have seen it coming. At the end of this novel, the cat is out of the bag, if you'll pardon the expression, on the fact that the tree cats really are intelligent. Now, how intelligent we can't, but they basically, a bunch of tree cats who have never met human beings interact with humans in a way that can only be the result of intelligent communication. And they have it all on video. So the next book is going to be like Honor Stephanie and her friends are going to be having to deal with, okay, that cat is out of the bag now. How do we engineer this soft landing that we wanted? Historically, Stephanie Harrington, who is Dame Stephanie Harrington at the time, is essentially the author of the Ninth Amendment of the Star Kingdom's Constitution, which recognizes the tree cats as the native intelligent species of Sphinx and gives them reserves 1/3 of the planet for the tree cats in perpetuity. And that grows directly out of Stephanie and her great tree cat conspiracy and the friends and allies that she enlists along the way. So she's a remarkable young lady. Um, and she's grown up a lot. She's like 17 or 18, I think, at the end of this novel. I'd have to go back to check to be certain. And she's been through tempests of the heart and whatnot along the way. Although not with the tearing angst that you see. Okay, I said earlier that I have strong views about young adult novels. I think that. Do you know how Robert Heinlein answered the question when somebody asked him how you wrote a young adult novel?
I do not. I mean, I've read some of them. I don't know what his
Okay.
answer would be,
He
though.
said you write it exactly the way you would write a novel for adults and then leave out the sex and the cussing.
Okay.
Okay. You do not write down to them just because they're young adult authors. You respect their ability to follow the story. And you don't sugarcoat, you don't round off all the sharp edges, but you also don't write dystopia that is going to confirm for a young reader that the world is just as bad or worse than they thought it was. Okay. I remember one novel that I forced myself to read all the way through that was a young adult novel. I will not mention it by name. But the heroine was a cutter. She cut herself to cope with all of the terrible things going on around her. Her friends were in just as bad a place as she was, and at the end of the novel, her triumph was that she survived and most of her friends didn't, and she was still a cutter. Okay, that is not the story that you need to hand to a young adult, especially a young adult who already is feeling alienated or like adults don't understand him or whatever else. The other thing is I love J.K. Rowling's novels by and large, but the first two or three grate on me a little bit. Now, I read all of them through the Half Blood Prince to my kids while they were still in the nursery. Okay, I plead guilty to that. My kids got read The Lord of the Rings twice before the girls who were adopted from Cambodia had. That's one of the ways I taught them English was I read them The Lord of the Rings in its entirety twice while they were still in their cribs.
I used Army running cadences. Yours was probably healthier for their mental health.
We tried. Anyway, the problem that I have with the Harry Potters is endemic to a lot of young adults, which is that all of the adults in the books are either evil or incompetent in order to give the kids agency. Okay, I mean, think about the Dumbledore in the first couple three Harry Potter novels. You know, he's like, yes, he's a really smart guy, but he is totally oblivious to the stuff that's going on under his nose until Harry and Hermione and Ron find the answer, do whatever they need to do. It's only as Harry and his friends are getting older and Dumbledore is beginning to interact with them more as young adults rather than children that Dumbledore turns out to be a very intelligent, deep character who's got this strategy that's been going on all this, for all this time. Well, in the Star Kingdom novels, there are adults who are villains. Okay, and some of them are pretty nasty villains, although they don't do a lot of mustache twirling and stuff. But they're also, Stephanie has really good parents who understand her and are supportive of her. And I can still find enough crap to throw at her to give her plenty of agency dealing with it. Okay. And to me, that's what young adult novels need to do. They need to be a window. It's all very well to say that they have to have characters in them that the reader can identify with. And I think that's where a lot of the dystopia came from for a while there, was in we're trying to reach kids who feel alienated and we need to give them characters that they can identify with that could be them. Well, that may be, but if you're going to give them characters they can identify with that could be them, then those characters in a healthy storytelling perspective have to be able to accomplish things. They may not be able to fix the world. They may not be able to solve all their problems, but they need to be more than just helpless pawns or facing a situation which is so vast and terrible that no one could overcome it, if you see what I'm saying. And that's one of the things that these books do. I mean, and that's one of the things that the Plague Years did for some of the characters who were born on Sphinx, and who saw their parents and their grandparents and their siblings decimated by this disease. In A New Clan, Cordelia and her sisters, she has two sisters, are the only survivors out of her mom's family after the plague, and they have two foster brothers. They aren't formally adopted, but they're the only two survivors out of the neighboring claim, and they were raised with Cordelia and her sisters, and that creates a different situation because we're giving you a problem that is not created by rotten, nasty humans that they have to survive and cope with. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the fifth book in this series, I did a quick check while you were speaking.
Yeah.
It was out in March. I know with the way
Yes.
Tribe Club works, sometimes there's such a lag. I could see how it could surprise you. Like, oh, that published today. Okay.
Well, I got my author's copies early.
Right.
And we're working on we just finished work on the anthology that drops in November. So I was getting a little vague there on exactly what the timeline was. Yeah, this one actually, when it came out, it did well. I'm happy to say, especially for a young adult.
So when you wrote this, did you set out to write a coming of age story?
A yes and no. More yes than no. Stephanie's coming of age is hugely, crucially important to the novel, and the same is true for her friends who are dealing with this with her. This novel, in a lot of ways, there's a strand in it that is much darker than in the earlier novels, in that one of the characters in the earlier novels, who Stephanie did not like at all when they met. The last couple of books, you've seen a little deeper into that character's character, if you'll forgive me for using that construction. In this one, you find out why she wound up the way she wound up, and it's pretty dark. But at the same time, at the end of it, she is dealing with and triumphing over the darkness that was a part of what made her the person that Stephanie didn't like, and who by the end of this book Stephanie regards as one of her closest friends. And that is that. When I say that I don't like dystopian novels, I don't like novels that leave people being helpless. Novels in which young people have to grapple with dark things, that works. Okay, that's part of life. That's part of telling the story of real human beings. And that's something that can be a hand up to a young reader who is trying to figure out, why is this happening to me? And the answer that most young people come to when bad things happen to them is, I must have done something to deserve it. And so I speak as someone who's married to someone I love and admire more than I could possibly say, who had an alcoholic, abusive, physically and mentally abusive father. Okay. And that leaves a mark. No matter how strong you are, that leaves a mark. But it is something that you can survive, that you can find your way through with the help of the right people, with the right approach and everything else. And that's something you can communicate to a young person who's in that situation. And that's why the darkness in this novel is in it, to be totally honest. That's why that strand is in it. It's for Sharon.
So does that continue on to the next book? Obviously, it's not written yet, I would assume.
Well, the next novel is going to have its own dark stuff, but that particular strand of darkness is pretty much resolved in this book. It's not really ended, but it's resolved, if that makes sense. Because these are live human beings. The situation is going to continue. And where you are in your relationships after you triumph over something like this is going to continue with your same relationships with those same people going forward for however long. But yeah, it's I would say that the last two books.
Is this going to end at 7 then?
Well, actually, we only have one more under contract after this one.
Okay.
And at that point, I'm not sure. We're going to have told the essential story of Stephanie's early life, okay? And we're going to have established how she becomes the person who is the larger-than-life historical figure of Honor's time when you look back at her. Whether we continue after that, I don't know. Part of the problem is that I'll be 73 in October, and I've got a lot of loose ends that I need to, tidy up out there.
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson can't finish everybody's series.
Yeah, that's true. Well, actually, I've picked some people that I'm going to be handing keys to literary universes to. That we're working together now to get them involved in the series that I will be entrusting to them when I'm no longer writing them. Um, when I was a younger lad, a mere child of 36, I think, when I sold the first novel, um, I would work till 3 o'clock in the morning. I would write 750,000 words a year. I'm no longer able to produce that many words. Well, let me put it this way: I'm no longer able to produce that many quality words.
Right.
The one thing that I want is I want to know when I am no longer playing my best game and be willing to step down at that time. Okay. I would prefer for my series to end, if they're going to end going strong, than die with a whimper, if you follow me.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm looking for, the biggest problem I think with people taking over series when the original author is no longer writing lies in the voice change of the writing. As I think you and I were discussing before we began recording, it's a writer's voice. It's the way the writer tells the story that draws the reader to the story. It really is. I cannot I cannot create in the reader anything that isn't already there. I can create information and backgrounds and so forth the reader doesn't know about. But I can't create anything inside the reader that isn't already there. What I can do is I can write the story in a way that evokes things in the reader that the reader might not have thought about ahead of time. Okay. And it's the way that I write the story, the way that I voice the characters, the way that I create the literary background is what draws the readers who like my stuff to my stuff. And people who don't like my voice are not drawn to my stuff. And there are other people out there who write military science fiction who may be more their cup of tea. All right. But it is the voice that draws the reader to the series. And what happens all too frequently when an author dies or stops writing, the person who comes in has a different voice. And so the reader is like, what happened to the characters that I loved? What happened to the universe I loved? What the hell is this? And they stop reading, they stop supporting. So what I want to do is I want to get the writers who I may be handing off to involved as collaborators or even writing solo novels in the universe that I'm writing shotgun on to get their DNA introduced into the voice of the series before I'm not here anymore.
That's
You see
smart.
what I'm saying?
So,
Um, yes.
so in this series, the Star Kingdom series,
hmm
where is the tech at here versus what people are used to from their experience if they've read only the original series?
You see predecessor tech here. Now, it's not that significant in the Star Kingdom novels. It's more the tech aspect is more important in the Manticore Ascendant novel, which are the story of Travis Long, who enlists in the Star Kingdom Navy when the Star Kingdom is like this little podunk kingdom. It doesn't have any warp points. Nobody knows it's there. Nobody cares it's there. And then all of a sudden, they're being attacked by mercenaries and whatnot. And like, what the hell is going on here? And what's going on is that somebody else has figured out that there's probably a wormhole there, and they want control of it. Travis doesn't know that when he's enlisted, and so in that respect, the warfighting technology is much more critical than any just tech edge in these books. These books, I don't like the term really in a lot of respects, but these books are more ecologically friendly. Okay. One of the things about writing space opera is that you spend most of your time in space. All right. You don't get a whole lot of time to look at planetary biospheres. You don't get a lot of time to look at how do humans interface with nature? How are humans good stewards? How are they bad stewards of nature? That kind of thing. You just don't get to do a lot of that in most space opera. And so this series lets me do that for Sphinx, and to some extent for Manticore, the other inhabitable planet Manticore A. The Manticore system is a binary star system. It's a single system political entity, the star kingdom is, but there are 3 habitable planets orbiting the 2 stars. So there's more real estate there than you might think when you talk about a single system polity.
And then you've got like range points you could put stations at in orbit, and
yeah. Well, you have 3 habitable planets
right.
here. Now they're not like Sphinx. It's like I say, it's like a 35% heavier gravity, so it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. All right. It's also it's far enough out that it's only habitable because it has a really active greenhouse cycle. But the average temperature, surface temperature on Sphinx is about I think 3 degrees lower than it is here on Earth, and that doesn't sound like a lot until you start thinking about the fact that the Sphinxian year is 5 Terran years, standard years long. So winter is like 16 months. Okay.
Yikes.
So
Yeah.
when you have meter deep snow out there, you're in a winter wonderland.
Now I know in the main series you have the life prolonging technology. Is that
Yeah.
around at this time?
No, that is why the tree cats are unaware of the fact that they're going to outlive the humans when they first meet them and begin bonding with them. It's not until Honor's time that the prolonged treatments, which probably, when you look at the other technology in the series, they really should have had that technology substantially earlier than I gave it to them. But I wanted Honor to be a transitional generation in it, if you see what I'm saying. So I just delayed that particular breakthrough.
And when you look at like developments of technology trees, if you study that, everyone thinks it lifts evenly, but it spikes in
It does.
weird ways, even on human, like
Yeah.
unknown history. So
Yes.
it makes sense that there would be, based on what they prioritize.
Yeah. Well, and the I've never specified exactly how the prolong technology works. I have in my notes, okay, this is how it does what it does. I've never actually specified it for the reader. One of the things I've done, and people may not believe this because I know I get people who talk about the info dumps in the mainstream novels. Part of that's because they're fighting a dang war, and you need to know what the tools and the menus of options are before you can really appreciate why a character does what a character does, if you follow what I'm saying. But there's a whole lot more that I've worked out in terms of background technology and so forth that I don't bring front and center in the novels than that I do. That's baked in. For example, people have been saying to me people are like, where's AI? We have AI now. Where is AI? And from the very beginning, the Honorverse is lousy with AIs. It's just that it's so in the background that you don't think about it. I mean, how many people think about how do the electric lights work when they turn them on or off at home? The one thing that I did establish for this universe is that there would never be a breakthrough into self-aware AI. And so the AI is all really just advancements on what we would call brilliant software that can do what it's programmed to do and nothing else. But you can't fly one of these starships with the helmsman using a joystick, even though it has several controls on the joystick besides just throttle and so forth. You can't fly that without an awful lot of AI translating, the inputs into what it is he's trying to accomplish.
So I think part of those questions are how tech illiterate the average person is. We don't actually have AI the way people think we do. We just have really smart programs that are, large language models. They're not actually, when you say AI, you're implying some level of sentience or sapience, and that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's one of the things we when we were talking earlier about person of interest. Was that before we started recording, or
no? This was
okay.
Actually, I don't remember.
Yeah, but okay. For those, if in case we didn't mention earlier, Person of Interest is probably my favorite science fiction TV show of all time. It actually, I think, has eclipsed Babylon 5 in that respect. But it's one of the things that they do is they deal with AI. Now they deal with it in some very optimistic, technologically optimistic terms, because they wanted to create genuine AI, not just more brilliant software. But they're dealing with the applications of it, and they actually coined the phrase, or I think they coined it. I'm not familiar with from anywhere else, of artificial super intelligence.
Okay.
These are the two computer systems that are at opposite ends of the conflict, and they refer to them from about, at least for the last two seasons, as ASI, not AI, when they're talking about it amongst themselves. Um, so but in this universe, no, we don't do that. It's kind of like, I just finished, when I did Honor Harrington, I had just done, let's see, I'd done the Dahak novels, Mutineer's Moon and so forth, in which you have this millennia old supercomputer, which is fully self-aware, became that way over time. And you have neural inputs to control the hardware and so forth. And I had done Path of the Fury, which has since been expanded into In Fury Born, which again has AI and neural inputs. And that is one of the reasons the Honorverse has neither self-aware AI nor neural inputs, is because I wanted to break. I wanted to not get pushed into a corner where I was doing just the one kind of technology, if you see what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
And so they're still, now they do have more voice input commands in the Honorverse than you are going to see a lot. And the reason that you don't see it a lot is that they don't use it on the bridge. And they don't use it on the bridge because they don't want the kinds of things that can happen to human voices under stress screwing up the commands. So they use keyboards a lot, you know, on the bridge.
And it also, like, you need redundancies that are analog to a point, because tech will fail.
Yeah. Well,
And that's
one
one
of
of
the,
my problems with sci-fi is it's all, the hollow screens or whatever. What happens when you get a power surge?
yeah. Well, one of the things that Manticore does in the mainstream novels is they adopt a much higher degree of, for want of a better term, automation, because
Right.
they're just running out of warm bodies for the ships. And so by the end of the book, you've got, like, by the end of the current end of the series, you've got super dreadnoughts that have crews that are probably no larger than those of a light cruiser pre-war, because they've had to accept more remote systems, more computer control, less. They have less warm bodies in sub control units to take over in the case of damage. So they actually have, the systems are more numerous but less robust, if you follow what I'm
That
saying.
makes sense.
Um, and it's a conscious decision on their part. And I deal with some of the consequences of this. For example, when you capture a bunch of enemy ships, where do you find the warm bodies to put aboard them?
Yeah.
And before the war, a Manticoran battle cruiser had, from one almost a short Marine battalion on board. And they had shipboard duties in combat and so forth. They were available for boarding forces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the end of the war, they've got like a reinforced company. And that has implications when you're trying to operate beyond the confines of the ship's hull.
So one of the things that comes up a lot in the concept of science fiction in general, but it would apply to your universe as well, is if you need to repopulate quickly to expand exponentially, a lot of people think cloning is and vat humans essentially is going to be where tech goes to meet those birthing needs. Is that something that exists in? I haven't read it in your books yet, but is that something that exists in your world
Oh,
as you understand it?
there's a lot of that. There's genetic slavery in this universe, and it's all coming from one place. And most of the galaxy says, "Oh no, bad, bad, bad," and corrupt people are still supporting it, under the table and in the dark. And genetic slaves are virtually all cloned. Now,
Okay.
the Honor's mother, Honor Harrington's mother, is from the planet Beowulf. Beowulf is the oldest of the extrasolar human colonies. And it's 1,000 years old by the time the Solarian League is created, because it takes that long for them to get faster than light travel for the colony ships, if you follow me. Um, they've got FTL for survey ships at a substantially earlier point, but it's a high risk kind of drive. You get paid a whole bunch of money to be on a survey crew, and you earn it because of the chance that you'll never get a chance to receive it. But colonists are going cryogenically out to the stars. That's how Beowulf, how Manticore was originally settled, and why it took 600 years for the colonists to make the trip. But Beowulf is sort of the biosciences capital, Athens, if you will, of the Solarian League. It's the gold standard. The Beowulf Code is the moral, ethical, medical code of the galaxy. And under that code, a cloned human being has all of the rights, all of the individuality of a human born any other way. Honor Harrington becomes accidentally pregnant um, at a very inconvenient time, and her son is transferred to an artificial womb in which he is gestated while she's off fighting battles and stuff and running radiation hazards and stuff that they don't want to expose a fetus to. And that's, in some ways, it's the default for highly civilized planets, because you can monitor the child's condition. There are all kinds of advantages to it. Honor's mom and Honor herself are both determined to bear as many to bear. Honor's mom, by the time where we are currently in the Honorverse, Honor's mom has had a total of, I think, 5 kids. And she's had 2 sets of twins. She cheated. But she's always had easy pregnancies. She's always had easy pregnancies. Most of the women in my family have had easy pregnancies. Now, Sharon was morning sick every single day of her pregnancy with Michael, except one. So I fully understand that this is not always the case for all women, and being pregnant is always inconvenient in a lot of ways for the expectant mother. And so if there is an option which is medically safe, and where the child's condition, you don't have to worry as much about the prenatal care of the mom and so forth. If the mom suffers a physical trauma, it's not going to be transmitted to the kid. There's all kinds of advantages to it. And these artificial wombs include physical stimulation that you would get, that the fetus would get as the biological mother moved around. And for example, Raoul, her son, who is gestated in one of these, hears recordings of her voice reading poetry and from her favorite books and whatnot the whole time that he's in the womb. So you avoid some of the classic concern in science fiction of how is this womb-born human who was turned out on an industrial assembly line, how are they going to enter life to begin with? But
Hugh
yeah,
Howey has some interesting takes on that in some of his books.
who?
Hugh Howey.
Yes. Well, and and we don't
It's a fun
know because
concept.
we've never been able to do it.
Right.
Okay, but I think that we have learned enough to know that pre-birth stimulation of the fetus is. One of my friends adopted a daughter from before the fall of the Soviet Union, from Romania. Okay, and I'm sorry, from Ukraine, not Romania, from Ukraine. And when he was adopting her, he and his wife were told that she was developmentally, there were problems. She just lay there. She didn't cry. She didn't, any of that stuff. Okay. And they said, well, we want her anyway. And she graduated from the governor's school for the gifted. And when he came to pick her up after one of her horseback lessons, he got there a little late and found her standing barefoot on the back of a horse as it cantered around the paddock. Okay, so obviously there was nothing developmentally wrong with this child, but but the problem was is that she was smart, and she was in an orphanage that was incredibly overcrowded, understaffed, and she knew that crying wasn't going to get anybody to come. They'd get to her when they got to her. And when you think about what growing up in that environment can do to you, okay, then you start looking at some of the things that could happen if you're going to be doing industrial scale cloning. Okay, and that's one of the things that the Beowulf Life Sciences Code would make absolute anathema. My daughters, Sharon and my daughters, are twins that we adopted from Cambodia. We had to fight with the U.S. government for over a year before we were allowed to bring them home. That's a whole nother long story, but it's one reason why I don't trust government bureaucracies at all. But anyway, we got them home at 15 months. Okay, the difference between them and my friend's daughter is that in the Cambodian orphanage that we were adopting them from, was one of the private orphanages, every child had a nanny who looked after that child.
Right.
And so they didn't have that disassociative aspect of their childhood. And it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. And the same thing would be true for cloned human beings, I'm thinking here. But yes, cloning definitely is a thing in the Honorverse. And for the genetic slavers operating out of the planet of Mesa, clones are disposable numbers on a asset sheet. For the rest of the galaxy, not so much. Now you're going to have, when you have as big a sphere of explored galaxy, as many star systems that have folks living on them as we have in these novels by Honor Harrington's time, you're going to have all manner of governments and attitudes, and some of them are going to be nightmare places on their own. Some of them are going to be made into nightmares by outside forces. Some of them are going to be really great places to live, etc. So I'm not saying that there's an absolute blanket attitude towards it, but yes, cloning is definitely an option when you're trying to build a population. It was not as much of an option at the time of Stephanie Harrington.
Okay.
And that's why they are doing the assisted colonization.
So that leads to the question: is the universe that you've got is very big. You've been writing in it since, well, the first one was published in 89. So I would assume 88 at the earliest, you were already writing these stories.
The first Honor Harrington novel wasn't published, I think, until 91.
Okay.
Yeah. Or no, maybe in later than that. Maybe in 92. I'd sold Bain like 5 or 6 novels before we did the first Honor Harrington.
Okay. I thought this was
they weren't all in print yet. Okay.
Right.
I'd sold Jim 5 novels before the first one was printed. It was great for him because he got to pay first novel prices for all of them. It was great for me because even at that rate, it was enough of an income stream that I could go to full-time writing immediately, which very few people are able to do. But yeah, the problem we had was that all of my novels were spawning sequels.
Right.
And so Jim said, David, I have you'll pardon the expression, novel proposition for you. Why don't you think about like creating a series from the get-go? Plan on the sequels. I said, ooh, shiny. And I pitched like 10 ideas to him. Honor was one of them. The books that eventually became the Safehold novels from Tor were one of them. The novels in the Gordian Protocol universe that I've done with Jacob Holo was one of them. The Sword of the South was one of them. But Jim jumped on Honor Harrington because he'd been looking, I didn't know it, but he'd been looking for somebody to do Hornblower in Space for 20 years.
Okay.
Now, she's not Hornblower in Space in a lot of ways, but I knew that if the series worked, that was who she'd be compared to. And that's one reason. I'd already figured out that her first name was going to be Honor, and there were a lot of reasons for that, including the associations of the name. But the reason that she's Honor Harrington is that I knew that she would be compared to Horatio Hornblower if the book succeeded. And so I went ahead and, as sort of an homage to C.S. Forster, who was one of my favorite writers when I was younger. Um, I'm still one of my favorite writers. What I'm saying is I'd met him at a much earlier stage than this. So Honor Harrington HH was sort of an homage to him, but she is not Hornblower. She's actually, if she has a historical analog, she's more of a combination of um, probably Horatio Nelson and oh crap, I can't Alexander Cochrane. If you're into naval history and you want to look at the British history, that's more who she's a fusion of. But she's also very much her own person, kind of thing. It's kind of like when I build literary worlds and I build political systems and so forth. I tend to use historical building blocks, but I assemble them into something that is not a clone of where the building blocks came from. People who try to read the Star Kingdom of Manticore as the United Kingdom or the British Empire too closely are going to find themselves stubbing their toes on a lot of things that were never part of the British Empire. The Royal Manticoran Navy, for example, if you look at it, the way that it actually works, the way its gizzards work, is a lot closer to the U.S. Navy than to the Royal Navy, despite the fact that clearly the British Royal Navy is one of its progenitors. And I spent a lot of time deliberately convincing readers that Nouveau Paris, the home of the Republic of Haven, which is the People's Republic of Haven by Honor's time and the really bad place, that it was the French Revolution that they were seeing. And actually what they were seeing was a restoration of a constitution that was very, very close to that of the United States today. But I gave you all kinds. I gave you the tennis. I had the conspirators meet on a tennis court and swear an oath. So they had the tennis court oath. And I even named the leader of the rebellion, Robert Stanton Pierre, so they could sign documents, Robespierre. Uh, I pulled out all the stops to convince you that it was France. It was like, watch my hand, watch my hand. No, this hand. So and I did that on purpose. I don't know why people think I'm devious, but I mean.
But that gets back to the question: how do you manage all that lore, given how deep the series is at this point? Because that's one of the things that has destroyed other universes, is they didn't manage the lore, and eventually you write contradictory things.
Yep. We have a few continuity errors. As a matter of fact, there's going to be an editor's note in this anthology, which is going to address a couple of continuity errors from earlier anthologies that had stories that were set in roughly the same time period, if you follow what I'm saying.
Right.
But I did an 80,000 word tech Bible before I wrote the first word of an Honorverse novel. And I've added to it since. I've maintained lists of characters and where they appear and so forth. I've updated the tech Bible as the storyline has progressed. I've run a timeline on the entire series. I didn't write with a timeline for many, many years. I just wrote and then said, okay, went back and looked and entered into the timeline. This is when it happens. I started using a timeline when I was writing, when the action started spreading out to such an extent the transmission of information became critical to what the characters were doing. So I had to know when the message left this star system and when it reached that star system, because it's affecting the decision loop. And when you do that, you have to use a timeline, and that also lends itself to keeping things straight as you go along. And finally, you get a friend like my friend Tom Pope, who is actually he's the real editor on this new anthology that's coming out, as well as co-authoring one of the stories in it with Jacob Hollow, who is also working in this universe with me. Tom is the central data storing house for the Honorverse. We're really to the point where if I'm like, okay, I'm working in a book and I send it to Tom, one of the things that he's doing is he's checking the continuity for what tech is actually available. When was this introduced? When was that introduced? Does this historical event, can it occur when you have it occurring here? Or would it have to have occurred earlier or later than you have it? That kind of thing. He's really, really good at that. And there also are a couple of Honorverse fan sites out there that are really good for readers who want to uh,
I do wonder, because I've seen those sites, if when they did the reader involvement in the Galaxy Quest, if any of it was inspired by your fandom because of the wiki that's out there.
I'm not sure. I think Galaxy Quest probably came earlier than the Honorverse wiki kicking up. I mean, okay, somebody pointed out to me the other day, and it absolutely flabbergasted me when they pointed it out to me. They said, okay, David, you have like twice as many solo and collaborative novels as Robert Heinlein produced. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't. No way, no way. And I went back and I looked, and I do. Okay, but I have a lot of advantages that he didn't have, including computers to write with. The fact that I use Dragon Naturally Speaking when I write, the size of the readership, which supports more books. There's any number of reasons why, but the Honorverse runs to, I think, 27 novels and 7 anthologies now. That's a big universe. Okay. And trying to maintain continuity has been something that I was working on from the very beginning. I'm actually pretty pleased with how well the earlier books have held up. Now, I've incorporated some stuff when I could as seamlessly as possible into the. You have to understand that Honor Harrington was born like a year before Al Gore invented the internet. Okay. I mean, there was no internet. And so anything that I was doing there, I was speculating on what was coming, and I tried to speculate smartly, and I tried not to paint myself into too many corners, if you see what I'm saying. But
Absolutely.
I was all the way up to Honor Among Enemies, which I think is the 6th novel in the series, before I could submit the manuscripts to Baen electronically. That's how long ago this series started. And so I'm really pleased that it reads as there are as few tech clankers in it as there are for people who are reading it. And I will say one thing that has ticked me off from the beginning is I get people say, "Why do your missiles are your missiles again not that smart? They're under computer control from the ship, blah 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 blah. We have smart missiles today who can do blah blah." And I'm like, they're missing the fact that was established very early on, that the problem is a matter of what the missiles can see, okay? And that each individual missile can only see a limited amount of the target zone and so forth. And what they're doing is the firing ships are using all of the missiles in the salvo as a dispersed sensor array to refine targeting instructions. Okay, so it's kind of like if you're a modern wet Navy submarine and you're firing a Mark 48 ADCAP torpedo, you don't cut the wires until you have to, because you can give it better guidance from the ship than it can do all on its own. Okay, this is even more pronounced when the missiles are so myopic, which they are in the Honorverse for most of the most. Now, eventually, you get to missiles that are really nasty, ugly. We hurt you a bunch missiles, but that's part of the tech growth in the series. If you follow me, so yes, I was aware that we had smart missiles even when I started writing them. Okay, I knew that, but there was a reason that I did it the way that I did it, and that's part of the. I don't want to call it the forethought, because that sounds like I'm patting myself on the back. But that's part of, I think, the conceptualization that has to go into the background for the universe that you're building for the story you're going to tell, especially if you're planning on it being a series from the beginning. And that's another way that you can. That's another reason that Jim's advice to plan a series was a good idea. Because if you're planning the series, planning implies forethought. Forethought
Right.
requires you to structure stuff. And that helps a lot when you're trying to avoid continuity issues. Now, I will say one other thing. I have been asked if Honor Harrington is Eurasian because my daughters were born in Cambodia. Okay. Honor Harrington was born 10 years before them, folks. Okay, I'm just saying.
Okay. So you did mention that there's an anthology coming out. So you want to talk about that a little bit before we wrap this up? Because I know I've kept you long and I don't want Sharon mad at me.
Well, yeah, Sharon is like, have fun, David. I'm going to bed. The anthology. The anthology is called Challenges. And it is, I think we're calling it the Star Kingdom Anthology. The anthologies that the previous stories have been are like Tales of Honor, and they kind of span the time zone, if you will, of the Honorverse. We have at least one story written by Chuck Gannon, which is well before Manticore is ever colonized. It's in the very early days of interstellar colonization. And we have stories that are very late in the series. These stories are all set during or immediately after. I think during in this case. No, okay, one set after of the plague years on Manticore. Okay, and the contributors are Marisa Wolf, whose work I really, really like, and Jacob Holo, who I've collaborated with on several novels now. And he and Tom Pope are writing together. There's a short story from Jane Linskold, which ties into a short story that appeared in the very first More Than Honor anthology, not Tales of Honor, More Than Honor, in the first More Than Honor anthology. And which is one of the reasons we're going to need the author's note, because she's correcting some of the stuff that we got wrong in that story. And then Jane is doing a story, has done a story, sorry, that's the story that Jane is doing. And then we have one from Dan Butler, which in terms of timeline is set the latest of any of the stories. It's after Manticore has started to become a galactic power, but in the very early days of it. So all of these are in the for want of a better term, the gestation period of the Star Kingdom. And I have a novella in it. I think 29,000 words, I guess. Which is going to stand some of what we think we know about the history of humanity and tree cats. You're going to find out it's not quite as simple as we thought it was, even for people who have been reading all the Stephanie Harrington stories. I won't say exactly how you find that out, but I will say this: there are certain stories that Sharon will not go to an author's reading if I'm going to read, because they always make her cry. This one's on the list.
Okay. There's only two, like, if you make people cry with your books, especially your editors or your first line readers, it better be really good, because the alternative is the story itself is just that bad.
I know. Well, okay. Usually when Sharon Sharon doesn't cry when it's a bad story. Sharon is more like, get out of here, or throws the book at you, kind of thing.
The short story that I made the Hugo's reading list for, because I didn't quite make the top 4 to get voted on, was one that the editors cry, and they're like, but it's a good thing. It's okay. So yes, I know,
yes.
I feel you there.
Yeah. Well, okay. The thing is, characters are what the stories are about. Okay, you may be doing speculative fiction. You may have social ideas you want to play with. You may, have tech you want to play with, but it's the characters especially if you're going to have a long-running series. If the readers aren't invested in the characters, are not invested in the series. And they don't have to like all the characters. They can be invested in a series because they hate the character and they want to see what's going to happen to him, will it be bad as he deserves kind of thing. Um, but you have to care about the characters. They have to be invested in the characters. And because of that, the characters have to matter to the author. You can't make somebody care about a character that you don't care about. Okay. Um, and I did you ever see the movie The Last Action Hero?
I did.
Okay.
Good
I
movie.
love that movie. Okay, I do. And I think that it didn't do as well at the box office as it did, partly because Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to be in it. They were expecting, last they were expecting Commando or something like that,
Right.
and they didn't get that. What they got was a wonderful movie about the kid who accidentally. But the line in the movie where he's riding his bike down and he's saying, "This'll work," and he says, "Wait, I'm a sidekick character. This isn't gonna work. I'm gonna die." Okay, the writer knew what he was talking about at that point, and the point at which the character, Schwarzenegger's character in the movies, finds out that his son's death was to increase readership. Okay, I mean, you're kind of like, I never want to meet Honor Harrington in a dark alley, because I care about her deeply, but things that I've done to her in her life, she's so gonna hurt me for, if
Uh,
we ever meet.
Before we were as free flowing as we do the interviews now, that used to be one of our questions. If your characters met you in a dark alley, like how would you fare?
Oh, well, she probably would leave me alive, but with every limb broken. I mean, and I wouldn't blame her. I wouldn't blame her. I mean, I have driven her absolutely to the teetering edge of madness in a couple of books. Not because they're dystopian books, but because of the decision she's had to make and the prices that she's had to pay. We were talking earlier, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that you can't sanitize military fiction. It's a lie if you do. Most Americans, probably most Western Europeans, have very little personal experience with violence. In America, we talk about what a violent culture we are, but the vast majority of Americans do not have day-to-day experience in their own lives with actual physical violence. The small number of veterans that we have, what we were talking about earlier, that's part of it, but another part of it is that we live in one of the safest societies in the history of the planet. And that's, we don't think about it that way, but we do. And we don't think about it that way because our own experience is our yardstick. We're not thinking about this in the terms of how someone in Vlad Tepes's Romania lived. We're thinking about it in terms of how somebody in the early 21st century lives. So one of the functions of military fiction, I think, has to be to deal as honestly as possible with violence, because we form our conception of what violence is vicariously through what we see in movies, what we see in the news, what we read. And I think that it is incumbent upon someone who is going to write military fiction to emphasize, or at least deal with, the price of military conflict on a societal level and on a personal level. Have novels in which or movies for that matter, in which the hero or the heroine wades to the boot tops through blood through the entire book and emerges from the other side unscathed emotionally and mentally. It's pornography. It's
Well,
splatter.
we have a word for people like that. We call them sociopaths.
Yeah, we do. We do, actually. Now there's a difference between doing that and coming out of it and being able to actually live a post-violence life that is normative. okay, and a sociopath. I've known some people who were totally capable of squeezing the trigger in a military situation, who are in no way abnormal. It's just that their character allowed their personality, their upbringing, whatever went into them, means that they could do what they did, recognize it as a necessary deed, regret it, be scarred by it, but not let that experience change who they are. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, and Honor Harrington carries the deaths of her enemies as well as the deaths of her friends with her. And one of the reasons that Honor Harrington is in the minority of humans at this time who can't use the regeneration treatments, they're genetically incompatible with her, is that she's paid a physical price as well in the loss of her left eye, the loss of her right arm, that she has prostheses to replace. That was because I wanted to make the reader aware of the cost that was demanded of her because of who she was and where she was and what she had to do. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that that's, my contempt for dystopian literature doesn't mean that I don't think that it is totally legitimate and, in fact, in some ways necessary to create situations which are horrific for the characters to deal with. The problem is that the way that I visualize the story, the way that my storyteller's voice works, is that however horrific the circumstances, the character can either deal with them or the character can die trying to deal with them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And people have asked me, what makes a villain, what makes a hero in one of your novels? And if you look at my novels, the good guys are almost all responsibility takers. They're the people who look at a situation. They don't say, well, it's not my fault, not my monkey, not my, um, they're people who dig in to deal with things, who take the responsibility for their own actions and who feel it is their responsibility as adults to try and deal with the mess in front of them, whether they created it or not. Most of the villains are the opposite. Many of them are outright narcissists, but most of them are people who have no sense of responsibility and are totally willing to do whatever they need to do to get what they want. Okay? And that is probably the nutshell of the way that I view morality in both real life and in fiction. Um, and like I say, that's part of the way that I tell the story.
Okay. So did you have anything that you think the readers need to know? Because we're at the 2 hour mark, and I know, like I said, you've got plans. I can't keep you forever. Is there anything that you think they need to know about the Star Kingdom series that you co-wrote with Jane Linskold? Linskold. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I gotta say it's funny. Because of the way Jane's last name is spelled, the first anthology that she appeared in, I made sure that they knew that they got her last name spelled right on the cover. I was so focused on the last name that I didn't realize that they'd spelled Jane wrong. I wasn't worried about that one. Jane gave me grief over that one, I'll tell you. I would just say that the Star Kingdom novels work perfectly well as standalone novels separated from all the rest of the Honorverse canon. They are young adult novels, and in my book, a young adult novel should be something that an adult can read with just as much pleasure as a young person. They're just something that is designed to be accessible to a younger reader in terms of the characters and what they're dealing with and what they're going through. Uh, um, and they deal with uh, they deal with issues of conservation. They deal with ecological responsibility. They deal with interspecies responsibility, and not just for the intelligent species involved. And one of the guys with the Universe Today podcast has pointed out that they could also be, in some respects, an NRA printer for people dealing with self-defense. Because I didn't. Yes, it's a YA novel, and yes, there are guns in it. You have to kind of deal with that as part of the thing. I think that people who have read the mainstream novels would enjoy them even more than somebody meeting them for the first time, in part because they would see the beginnings of threads that run through the later books. They were fun to write. I hope they're fun to read, and I have had a gratifying number of parents of young readers and young readers themselves who have come up to me and told me how much they enjoyed them. I will tell you that um, I never crammed reading at my kids. Okay. And that was partly because that's what dad did for a living. All right. But the girls had read like the first two, the first four, I think, of the Star Kingdom novels. And Morgan came down the stairs one day and she said, "Dad, where's the next book?" And I said, "Well, it hasn't been written yet." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because Jane and I don't have a contract for it yet. And she said, "So you don't have a contract to write it for?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, you could write it for us." I put that down as one of my okay, gold check marks. There are a couple of others, things that people have said to you that make you know that you got it right. Um, One of them that means an enormous amount to me. I was at EasterCon in the UK as their foreign uh, literary guest, and I was at a coffee clutch, and there were we talked about the books. There's one guy who didn't say a whole lot, but as he was leaving, he took me aside and he said, "I wanted to thank you for the Grace and Armsman." Now, Honors becomes she becomes a stedholder, a great fuel lady on another planet, as well as a citizen of the Star Kingdom. In essence, she's a queen in a planet-wide empire that has an emperor, an over-emperor. Anyway, he says, "I wanted to thank you for the Grace and Armsman." And I said, "You're welcome." And he said, "I think you may be the only person writing science fiction today who got the relationship between the detail and the protectee right." And I'm like, well, thank you. And then he handed me his card. He was with Buckingham Palace Security. Okay, I took that as a positive sign. And every so often you get those that let you know that you did something right. And sometimes you get letters or you talk to people, and the books have really meant something to them at some particular point in their life, that they were there when they needed them. And that's one of the reasons that I say that I can't create anything in you that isn't already there. I can only cause you to realize that it's there, if you see what I'm saying. And I don't write the books to be lifelines for anybody. I don't write them to be, this is going to be a life-changing experience for somebody. I write them to tell a good story, and I think good stories tend to have that effect. All right. But I can't, it's sometimes, Jim Butcher once said, when somebody thanks him for a story that changed his life, he's like, "Okay, fine, I'm glad it did that for you. That's not why I wrote the story. I'm glad that it did it, but I didn't write the story to do that for you." And that's true. But it is still, when somebody comes up to you and tells you, your books were really formative for me, or I read them on a deployment that was really not good and they helped me get through it, something like that, that means something. And it's a little bit of the author's way of paying back the people who invested the time to read the book in the first place, if you see what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
It's one of the perks.
So, as we bring this to a close, dear listener, this is the part where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. It really does matter. With like a bazillion books out, David can't read all of the reviews. But what I can tell you is you can convince other readers to buy what you like. And if you do that well enough, the publishers will say, hey, we want more of that. And you can indirectly influence the market to give you more of what you like. And some of the way you do that is with those reviews. So they really do make a difference, more than you think, even in traditional publishing.
They make a tremendous difference, especially early on in a series.
Yes.
And JR's totally right about that.
And with that, I would like to ask you, David, how can people find you on the interwebs? And as usual, all of that will be linked in the show notes.
Well, I am not as active on social media as a lot of writers. Partly that's because, like I say, there was no social media when I was becoming a writer. I have my personal Facebook page, David Weber. I have two David Webers. One of them is my business page that I don't spend as much time as I should on, but I do follow. There's also there's David Weber, the author, which I am not officially affiliated with. It's fan moderated. I do drop in over there occasionally, and I do follow it. And that's really pretty. I do have davidweber.net, which is my homepage, but to be honest, I have not updated it in some time. And the person who was keeping it up and updated has been dealing with some health issues in her family, which has caused that to get sadly behind. But there's some archived commentary there that might be fun. And if you're into podcasts, you could take a look for the Honorverse Today, which is Raul Wybera and two of his friends. Raul is well acquainted with the Honorverse. He's read all of the mainstream novels and most of but his buddies are reading them for the first time, and they are reacting to them and discussing them and reading them in the right order. And all but one of their commentaries has been positive. I got one that they're like, oh, I don't know, I didn't like this book very much, which I don't blame them for. I understand where they're coming from. But by and large, I'm getting like 4 stars, 5 stars. So you should go read it because it will make you fall in love with the notion of reading the books. And like I say, they do talk about them in terms of where they fall. I will say this: a lot of people have asked me what order the book should be read in, because they do tend to jump around somewhat, especially in what a lot of people think that I have side series for the main series, and I really don't. What I have is they are side series in one sense, in that they are dealing with parts of the action that are physically removed from where Honor is, because Honor can't be everywhere and do everything. Okay, so there are some sub-series that are running parallel with the quote main series. And they do a pretty good job. But the order to read them in is publication order. That's the order in which I structured them, and that's the order in which they should be read.
And I would bet if you had questions, because you didn't mention it, but it's in the prep work we did.
Yes.
The Royal Manticoran Navy has a Facebook group,
Yes.
which is a fan club, and they also sometimes meet up, they're organized by ships. They have meetings, do cookouts, and whatnot. But their Facebook group, I imagine if you ask, hey, what order should I read them? I just found these books. You'll get like a bazillion people excited to tell you about them.
Yeah, then you'll probably get a half a bazillion different orders in which you should read them. But the TRMN, I am affiliated with them, but from the very beginning, they have been their own people, and I have made it very clear that I don't want to direct or control the group. But they have done some extraordinary things in their time, especially with charitable projects they've undertaken. And it means a lot to me that the kind of people who are going into the TRMN would like my books enough to do it. It says something about the books if they can appeal to people like that, that I think is a good thing.
And it's, if you don't know, its organization is kind of parallel to what the 501st Legion for Star Wars and the various offshoots of that, or the, I don't know if the Trek one has a specific name, but it's the same kind of concept where they're fans of the books that also like other things. So like,
yeah,
before life got crazy, I used to participate in the local one, and they do cookouts. So it's fun in addition to that. So
and they do a lot of cosplay.
Yeah.
And it's fun. Oh, by the way, I should add that it was with malice aforethought that the Society for Creative Anachronisms is still going strong in honor Harrington's Day. her uncle Jacques is a lifetime member, and that's one of the ways that I got the 1911 45 automatic into Honor's hands, because Uncle Jacques gave it to her for a birthday gift. So yeah.
Okay. All right. And you can find us, a dear listener, by going to our link tree at linktr.ee, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the bits, shoots, the rumbles, YouTube, TikTok, the Twitters, the Spotify, the Discord, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people, save the shenanigans from Madden Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, and then they will swim away on a river of Java, people. And if you want to use the link in the show notes to buy some of that coffee brand coffee, use the code PODCASTGRUNTS. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. It does help keep the lights on. For at a moment, the podcast operates at a loss. I don't mind doing it, but every penny helps. So if you like good coffee and you want to support the show, that's one way to do it. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right, thanks for coming on, David. This was a lot of fun. And I do want to have you back to talk about the Safehold series at some point. But I got to give you time to recover, because this was a long one.
Oh, hey, the problem's getting me to shut up, not getting me to talk.
That's a good problem to have. Sometimes authors, it's like pulling teeth to get them to speak. But I've been on the other end of an interview, even just on my own podcast, and I had a co-host. It didn't survive edits because it corrupted, but it's not as easy to be on the receiving end, even having done hundreds of interviews of other people. So more props to the people that can manage to do it well. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. So